My fellow Americans, Supreme Allied Commander General MacArthur and Allied representatives on the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. The thoughts and hopes of all America, indeed of all the civilized world, are centered tonight on the battleship Missouri. There, on that small piece of American soil, anchored in Tokyo Harbor, the Japanese have just officially laid down their arms. They have signed terms of unconditional surrender. Our first thoughts, of course, thoughts of gratefulness and deep obligation, go out to those of our loved ones who have been killed or maimed in this terrible war. On land and sea and in the air, American men and women have given their lives so that this day of ultimate victory might come and assure the survival of a civilized world. No victory can make good their loss. We think of those whom death in this war has hurt, taking from them fathers, husbands, sons, brothers, and sisters whom they love. No victory can bring back the faces they long to see. Only the knowledge that the victory which these sacrifices have made possible will be wisely used can give them any comfort. It is our responsibility, ours, the living, to see to it that this victory shall be a monument worthy of the dead who died to win it. And our thoughts go out to our gallant allies in this war, to those who resisted the invaders, to those who were not strong enough to hold out, but who, nevertheless, kept the fires of resistance alive within the souls of their people, to those who stood up against great odds and held the line until the United Nations together were able to supply the arms and the men with which to overcome the forces of evil. This is a victory of more than arms alone. This is a victory of liberty over tyranny. It was the spirit of liberty which gave us our armed strength and which made our men invincible in battle. And so on VJ Day, we take renewed faith and pride in our own way of life. We have had our day of rejoicing over this victory. We have had our day of prayer and devotion. Now let us set aside VJ Day as one of renewed consecration to the principles which have made us the strongest nation on earth and which, in this war, we have striven so mightily to preserve. Victory always has its burdens and its responsibilities as well as its rejoicings. But we face the future and all its dangers with great confidence and great hope. God's help has brought us to this day of victory. With His help, we will attain that peace and prosperity for ourselves and all the world in the years ahead.
Please welcome Stephen Watson, President and CEO of the National WWII Museum, to the stage.
Well, good evening, everyone, and what an inspirational way to start the program here tonight. And I want to thank you for being here with us tonight as we commemorate the end of World War II on the 80th anniversary of when Japan's unconditional surrender was announced. And what better way to mark this important milestone than alongside the men and women who contributed to Allied victory. And I'm delighted to say that tonight, to begin this ceremony, I want you to join me in recognizing the members of the World War II generation who are here with us this evening. We have three that you will hear from later. First, I want to recognize Emily Drake, who's here from Pittsburgh, who served on the War Production Board and in the Women's Army Corps during World War II. Thank you, Emily, for being here tonight. Also, Lou Harned, who served with the British 8th Army, the U.S. Air Force, and Army National Guard throughout his over 30-year military career. Lou, thank you for being here tonight, sir. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Sanford Jones, who served in the U.S. Army Air Forces flying 35 combat missions. So, Dr. Jones, thank you, sir. Of course, thank you all for your service, but I think importantly, thank you for winning the war. And had a chance to visit with all three for a few minutes tonight, and we're in for a real treat tonight. Some words of wisdom, and we look forward to hearing more in the program in a few minutes. I'd also like to thank all veterans and active duty military service members who are with us and your families for the important role they play in supporting you. Please stand or wave and be recognized for your service to our country. Thank you. A few other folks I'd like to recognize. We have a number of our World War II Museum volunteers here tonight. Thank you all for being here and the great work you do every day. Also like to recognize one of my 57 bosses, Robert Priddy, who is a member of our Board of Trustees, and his wife Kiki for being here tonight. Thank you, Robert. And Councilmember Eugene Green, thank you for being here, sir. And thank you for showing up for so many of our museum programs. It's amazing. You're here just about every time I'm here, so I appreciate it, sir. And also to all of our members and donors who make programs like tonight possible. I know so many of you here are charter members, Patriot Circle members, so give yourself a round of applause for your support of the museum. So this past May, of course, our nation observed the 80th anniversary of victory in Europe, the moment when Allied forces formally accepted Germany's unconditional surrender. It was an incredibly important day, marking the end of the war in Europe. But I think, as most of you here tonight know, the fighting continued in the Pacific Theater, which would see some of the war's most brutal combat over the months that would follow. And with the United States' decision to drop atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the world would literally never be the same. So it was against this backdrop that on August 14th, 1945, President Harry Truman received word of Japan's unconditional surrender. Americans and people all over the world, and we'll hear about some of these reactions, I'm sure, in a few minutes, immediately celebrated this momentous occasion, although it would take another 19 days until the official surrender ceremony, as we saw in the video, took place on September 2nd. The cost of this victory was incredibly high, and if you've had a chance to visit our Liberation Pavilion that we opened about 18 months ago, the very first gallery tries to bring you to that cost of victory. 416,800 American service members who never returned home from the war, and over 65 million lives lost throughout the world. So when all of you arrived tonight, and I see several of you wearing it, you received a poppy. So let this serve as a powerful reminder to never forget those who gave their lives protecting our freedom from tyranny. That's our job here at the National World War II Museum. We are committed to telling the story of the American experience in World War II so that all generations will understand that price of freedom and be inspired by what they learn within the walls of our exhibitions. And the lessons of the war, we believe, continue to be just as relevant today as they were 80 years ago. Through Allied victory, the World War II generation ensured freedom of speech and expression, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. And it remains our duty to preserve those freedoms. And with that, to talk a little bit more about that and other things that happened at the conclusion of the war. I'd like to introduce Dr. John Curatola, who has the longest title at the museum. He is the Samuel Zemurray Stone Senior Historian within the museum's Jenny Craig Institute for the Study of War and Democracy. He's a great guy, he's an excellent historian, and if you haven't read his latest book on amphibious doctrine, you should buy it before you leave here tonight or go online. But John, come tell us a little bit more about what it means today.
First of all, I want to thank Stephen for the shameless plug of my book, but seriously, we're here more for a somber mood to reflect on the end of the war, and what I'd like to talk to you about today is what are the legacies of that war that still reverberate? Perhaps no event in the 20th century shaped our current millennium more so than World War II. The war and its seismic events were global and didn't just reflect the defeat of the Axis nations and their designs on territorial aggrandizement, but the war and its legacy continues to affect every nation in today's global environment, politically, socially, technologically, and economically. The war served as a catalyst for key shifts in these areas that manifest themselves in the decades following the war and still affect us here in the 21st century. Politically, the global conflict resulted in creating a new post-war world, a new era where the fall of the colonial systems, recognition and development of independent movements, and the growth and appreciation of national sovereignty. Despite the Soviet Iron Curtain descending upon most of Europe and in communism in parts of Asia, the yoke of imperialism in much of the world diminished with the emergence of growing independence movements. American servicemen ridding the oppressed peoples of Axis authoritarianism and then restoring national sovereignty helped set the stage for national self-determination throughout the globe. Independence movements gained momentum around the world, seeking national sovereignty, with most emerging as nascent democracies. By liberating occupied nations during the war, U.S. service personnel, like the ones that we have with us today, helped set the stage for independent nations and independent peoples. The war also gave great prominence to social movements calling for equality under the law, both domestically and internationally. As the old empires fell, recognition of individual rights became more pronounced and accepted. The UN's Universal Declaration of Rights in 1948, supported by Eleanor Roosevelt, reflected such thought. Although still not fully embraced as a universal set of values as we enter the 21st century, respect for human rights came about after the liberation of Axis occupations. President Franklin Roosevelt, in his 1941 State of the Union address, introduced the four freedoms that Stephen just mentioned to us: freedom of speech, worship, from fear, from want, and outlined most of the post-war values that were championed by the United States. Domestically, civil rights movements came about as veterans from historically marginalized communities sought their fair share of the American dream. World War II veterans and civil rights leaders such as Medgar Evans, Amzie Moore, and Hosea Williams worked to create a more equitable nation. Wartime Executive Order 8802, outlawing workplace discrimination in government contracts, established a new social precedent, while Truman's post-war 1948 Order 9981 ended military segregation. Similarly, the post-war GI Bill helped veterans from these same communities obtain a college education, suitable housing, and access to opportunities in life, liberty, and their pursuit of happiness. The war also accelerated technological innovations in ways never experienced before and laid the groundwork for our modern information-based societies. Global satellite communications, atomic technology, use of microwaves, sonar and radar, modern computers, and associated electronics have much of their genesis in wartime scientific development. Similarly, jet aviation, intercontinental travel, nuclear energy, and space flight and exploration all became staples of our modern existence. Veteran aces like Chuck Yeager and Bob Hoover helped advance aviation technologies over the skies of Muroc, California as test pilots breaking the sound barrier in 1947. Medical advances in immunology, blood fusion, skin grafts, extensive use of penicillin, and new surgical techniques have all benefited the larger global community. Given these advances, our world is now more of a community than it ever was before, with human endeavor reaching outer space while also having an improved quality of life. Nations gained independence and established themselves economically as new global markets emerged. During the war, the American Military Transportation Services established new models of global reach. Men such as U.S. Army Air Corps Colonel Robin Olds and Navy Captain D.F. Smith oversaw air fleets that traversed both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Simultaneously, U.S. Navy sailors and Z-men of the Merchant Marines sent the bounty of American industry globally by surface shipping. After the war, such transportation conveyances made shipping products overseas cheaper. As a result, nations sought raw materials in markets within the globe, becoming more economically connected and interdependent. Over the second half of the 20th century, the United States, Europe, and Japan experienced amazing economic gains. With the Marshall Plan's rebuilding effort, the gross domestic product in Europe eventually tripled. This interconnectivity of national economies is demonstrated as the value of exported goods as a percentage of a nation's GDP grew from a mere 4% in 1945 to 25% in 2014. It was American transportation systems that set the stage for today's modern international commerce that buoyed markets and saw an exponential growth in national economies. After VJ Day, the United States was the only major combatant with its infrastructure, population, economy, military force, and political structures all intact. Given these factors, our veterans helped design, build, and safeguard a new global environment leading to an entirely new age of human existence and achievement. Much of what I address here today, as Stephen pointed out, is located and mentioned in our Liberation Pavilion. While new challenges face us in the current millennium, the legacy of World War II remains with us today in almost every aspect of our lives. This museum is a standing reminder how this such change came about, the role these individuals played, and what this nation can do when it decides to fully commit itself. Thank you. At this time, please join me in welcoming Colonel Pete Crean, the President of Education and Access for the National World War II Museum, along with our three World War II veterans, Lou Harned, Emily Drake, and Sanford Jones.
And good evening, everyone. If you'll just give us a moment to get settled, and we'll bring us to the main event. Thank you, man. So just make it.
I'm nervous.
Harry,
Well, I am too.
well, let me tell you, you have a very friendly audience right here.
Good.
Well, well, they're not.
Doing great.
How about that?
You're doing fantastic.
Well, Emily, we're here because there are not many of us left.
That is right. That is right.
So,
Wow. Thank you.
Well, good evening again, everyone, and thank you for joining us on what is really an auspicious day, not only for this museum and for all of us in it, but really for the entire world. 80 years ago today was the announcement that the Japanese had now accepted the unconditional surrender, the terms from Potsdam. Absolutely. And these three people were there. They were in World War II. One of the things that I think makes this museum so special is how we tell the personal stories of World War II. And what a better way of commemorating the day than hearing from three actual World War II veterans. All three of their lives took different paths during and after the war, but I think they're emblematic of all the stories of all of the Americans who served in the war. So before we dive into the questions, I'd like to take a moment to tell you a little bit more about Dr. Harned, Emily Drake, and Dr. Sanford Jones. First, we'll start off with Brigadier General Dr. Lewis Harned, who was born in Madison, Wisconsin in 1924. He was rejected by the Army for the first time in 1942 due to poor eyesight. It seems like it really held you back. He served as a volunteer ambulance driver with the American Field Service and was attached to the British 8th Army in North Africa and in Italy. After the end of the war, Dr. Harned attended college and medical school and earned his MD in 1951 and served in the U.S. Air Force as a surgeon during the Korean War. 30 years later, as if he had not had enough yet, after an extensive career as an orthopedic surgeon, he volunteered for the Wisconsin Army National Guard and was commissioned as a lieutenant colonel. So obviously, the Army forgot about that sight problem from 1942. Because by 1990, he was the commander of the 13th Evacuation Hospital and deployed to Kuwait in support of Operations Desert Shield and Storm. Yeah. And he retired in 1992 with the rank of Brigadier General.
Brigadier General.
Next we have Emily Drake, who was born of Polish immigrant parents in Sharpsburg, Pennsylvania in 1925. She was only 16 when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and so she trained as a stenographer and worked for the local War Production Board until she was old enough to enlist in the Women's Army Corps in 1944. She was assigned to a base in Florida, where she worked until she was discharged as a sergeant in 1946. Fluent in both Polish and in English, she went on to work for the Polish Embassy in Washington, D.C., and for the U.S. Air Force as a civilian in Germany. She also worked for the Veterans Administration Hospital in Pittsburgh and always made time to volunteer at VA medical centers during her travels across the United States. So she served veterans for her entire life. Also born in 1925 is Dr. Sanford L. Jones, Sr., of Richmond, Kentucky. He was drafted in the U.S. Army in 1944 and served in the U.S. Army Air Forces as a waist and nose turret gunner on the B-24 Liberator heavy bombers in the 740th Bombardment Squadron, 455th Bombardment Group, just like that aircraft right over there. Between November 1944 and April 1945, he flew 35 combat missions over Germany, Italy, and Austria. Oh, and Yugoslavia. After being discharged from service in 1945 at the rank of Staff Sergeant, He used the GI Bill of Rights to attend college and eventually earned a doctorate, becoming a professor at Eastern Kentucky University. So welcome to all three of you. So they didn't come to hear me talk. They came to hear you talk.
Yes.
And so, you know, for the war, 80 years ago today was the announcement that the Japanese were surrendering. But you weren't in the Pacific. You know, you were either in Europe or in Florida. So it's kind of a different experience. So what was that experience? Where were you when the war ended? And what were you thinking? When, you know, this whole new bomb has just been dropped. So why don't we just go ahead and start with you?
I was still at the San Giovanni airfield, waiting to be transferred to come back to this country. So I am transferred to Naples, and around May the 25th, we were on a troop ship, and we are coming back. And I'm coming back to Tenterfield, Florida, where I had previously trained as an aerial gunner. So during that period of time, June, and I am not really aware of the Nagasaki and the release of the atomic bomb. That will come later as I am more aware of things. I am using radioactive isotopes that is a product of the atomic explosion, like iodine-131, that concentrates in the thyroid gland, and people are ingesting it, and so forth. I'm learning about the atomic bomb explosion and so forth later on in my training and experience.
Okay. Emily, how about you? Where were you when you heard that Japan was going to surrender? Do you remember that moment?
Well, I was in the service at that time, and like I say, like everybody else, we just started screaming and was so happy about it. And especially I was thinking of my brothers coming back home, because my two brothers were both in the service, and one was in there for 4 years and never got home. So that was a big day.
Well, that had to be quite a relief to your family and your mom that you hadn't seen their son in.
That is right. That is right.
Wow. And how about you, sir? Where were you when you heard the news, and what was it like?
I was on my way home from the lower campus on the University of Wisconsin after playing a touch football game. Got off the bus, was walking into the house, and my dad was there, which was surprising because he never was at home at that time. But what really got me was my mother was crying. I had no idea what had happened, and I said, "Mom, what's wrong?" And she said, "We've been attacked by the Japs at Pearl Harbor." And my next question was, "Where's Pearl Harbor?" And I didn't know at that time. And that's how it all started. I was a junior in high school at that time, 18 years old. Couldn't wait till Monday came so that all of us 18-year-olds could enlist. But that's another story, yeah.
Sure. And how about the end of the war? How about were you still in Europe when the war ended?
Yes, right. I spent my 19th birthday in Damascus, Syria, which was rather unique.
And I assume there was a huge party, or was everybody just relieved that it was over, or was there cheering, celebrations? I mean,
Well,
when they came across and said, "It's over"?
You know, I was very patriotic. My family was patriotic. My brother was a fighter pilot during the Korean War. My son was the class of '81 in Annapolis. And my dad was a pharmacist mate during World War I stationed in Navy Pier in Chicago. So I couldn't wait to be able to fight for my country.
I'd make a comment. I'm back at Tenterfield, Florida, where we had previously trained in gunnery school. And my thoughts are that we're going to be reassigned to the Pacific Theater of Operations. And I'm separated from my crew. I'm more involved in, at that time, I'd been assigned to the Parts Division. And that was based, I had listed on my induction papers that I'd been a clerk in a grocery store. So I'm going to the place where the different parts and numbers and so forth, back and forth, and wondering and thinking about when am I going home, what's going to happen to me. So I guess my awareness that the atomic bomb had been exploded, as I said, I don't think I had that type of communication, nor do I remember exactly what was occurring at that time.
You had a kind of somewhat unique for this group in that you had just completed 35 missions, and we always hear the stories about points. If you had 85 points, you could go home, but so some people with high number of points got to go home. Others had to get ready to go to Japan. And is that the situation you were in?
I did not hear anything about point system or counting. It was simply if we finished 35 combat missions, we would be reassigned. And the last 4 or 5 combat missions, and our last one was April the 18th, and during most of the month of April, we are bombing the frontline German troops, and in support of the 5th Army that had laid siege to Bologna, as the German troops are concentrating and going across the Brenner Pass to Innsbruck, Austria. So it's that type of bombing missions, and so by April the 18th, we are waiting for reassignment. And as I said, we are eventually going to be spending several weeks and so forth before we're sent back to this country.
And were you thinking that you were going to wind up going to Japan, or did you think you were going to be staying back?
That we would be going to the Pacific someplace, but it would be quite a transfer of operations. The B-29 was such a different airplane to the B-24, although the B-24 of its distance of flight was assigned to the Pacific Theater until the B-29 became the major distance flying type of airplane.
As obviously as an aviator who had been on multiple bombing missions, now there's a new kind of bomb. I'm interested in what you thought at the time. Could you even imagine what this new kind of bomb was?
Are you talking about
the atomic bomb?
Well, I in my studies, I had spent some time at Oak Ridge, understanding the structures of atoms and so forth. And I'm learning more of this as I do my research, but at the time that the explosions occurred, no, I was not aware of those.
Yeah, just seems like it could have been here's this massive new bomb, and I mean, you had been dealing with bombs for the last couple of years, so it's just amazing.
Well, we were dealing with, we were carrying 500-pound type bombs of irregular explosions, and the energy that's going to be released from the atomic bomb, I'm going to learn that later on in my experiences.
Sure. Let's go over to Emily here on, one of the things that strikes me you've had a life of service. And you joined the War Production Board at 16. And most kids at 16 are worrying about, football games and their grades and, upcoming school dances. Yet you joined the War Production Board in Pennsylvania.
No, that's all wrong.
Okay.
I was 17 when I graduated from high school, and I wanted to go into the service because my brother was one of the first ones drafted. He just got married a month and he got drafted. So then his wife joined. Well, I said, I want to join too. But anyway, I was 17, and you had to be 20 years with your parents' signature or 21 on your own. Well, I was only 17 when I graduated, which meant that I had to work for a couple of years, and that's where I worked for the War Production Board. It was a government job, and at the same time I was going to business school. I was studying to be a court reporter. I studied the stenotype, so that's what I did then. And so when I got to be 19, I couldn't stand it, so I had to lie about my age. and I went into, and like I say, I feel, how should I say, I feel I should be here with these battle soldiers, these great men, but I'm here because I know the women will be interested to know what a woman was going through in the Women's Army Corps. Because my story goes on and on. You might tell me to stop. But anyway, so I lied about my age. I did pass and got into the service, and I was assigned. Like I said, I went to stenotype school, and I didn't graduate because I joined the service, but I was capable enough with it that they assigned me to a job. And my job was taking testimony from GIs who were trying to get out of the service if they had dependency discharge, when they had problems at home. And I want you to know, at age 19 or 20 at the time, I heard stories like I never heard before in my life. and you could all imagine your own stories because I can't mention any of them. But anyway, so I did that. Well, anyway, I went to the command office because I wanted to go overseas. And I liked languages because I was already speaking Polish to my parents who were immigrants. And so the officer told me, he says, unfortunately, the quota was filled, so they weren't taking women overseas anymore. And he asked me if I spoke a foreign language. I said, yes, I speak Polish. He says, oh, well, you could get a job at the American Embassy in Warsaw. And I said, oh, I certainly would love that. Or you could get a job at the Polish Embassy in Washington, D.C. I said, are you kidding? I said, you need to know somebody to get a job like that. I never even learned anything about an embassy in school. I don't know if you people did, but I never did. I didn't even know what an embassy was or what they did. But anyway, so the officer said to me, oh, why don't you write the old ambassador a letter? I said, I'm going to write him a letter? I wouldn't even know how to start. So anyway, we left it at that. And so I did my job. Like I said, I took testimony from GIs, and there was quite an education because I aged quite rapidly. So, and I could go on and on and on, so you got more questions for that? It gets better.
Well, I'm sure it does. And one of the things that really struck me is, working at the Polish embassy, this is not an easy time for Poland. Poland it was horrible during the war. After the war is over, you have, large migration afterwards. And then, of course, they're behind the Iron Curtain. and you've got a catbird seat on all of this. What were you doing in the embassy, and what was kind of the feeling after you came out of the war?
Like I said, he told me to write a letter to the embassy, which I never did. But what happened, and I did not know it, he wrote to the embassy and told them that they had a woman here who could speak the language. And see, during the war, all the embassies were closed, and now the war ended on the 14th in August, and this was September, and they had already reopened and were, getting new employees. So anyway, the officer that interviewed me called me, and I said, oh my gosh, I said, maybe they're sending women overseas again. So I was excited about it, and here what he showed me was a letter, and it was from the Polish embassy, and I was thrilled to pieces that they even answered. But it said that the ambassador was out of the country, but upon his return, they would show him the letter. And I says, I never sent him a letter. And he says, I know you did. I did. So, of course, to this day, I regard the fact that I don't even remember this officer's name, and the fact that in the end, I finally did get a job at the embassy, but I'll have to tell you about that later.
Let's go over to Dr. Harned. Most folks, when we talk about the end of the war, or we talk about the war, most folks hear about, guys serving in American units here, or, deploying overseas in Patton's Third Army and all. Your experience was very different. You were with the American Field Service, but with the British. Probably a lot of the folks in the room here don't even know what the American Field Service is. So what is the American Field Service, and how did you wind up with the British?
Well, the American Field Service was started in World War I, and Ernest Hemingway wrote a book where he drove an ambulance during World War I. And it's very hard to explain the feelings that we had at that time. I was just absolutely crushed when I was turned down by the U.S. Army because of my nearsightedness. But I was able to volunteer and drive an ambulance for the British 8th Army. I was attached to the 78th Division, known as the Axe Head Division. My tour took me directly to El Alamein. That was after the British had won the battle, beating Rommel. There we learned how to take care of our ambulance. We drove American ambulances, Dodge as they were, four-wheel drive. The British ambulances were like boxcars. They could be blown over by a heavy wind. They had no four-wheel drive. They could not go with the advancing division. We were always sent with the advancing division at the time because of our ability to handle our ambulance. After my tour with the American Field Service, I received my MD and was drafted for the Korean War. At that time, it was the Air Force. After that period, I had a gap, joined in my service, joined the Wisconsin Army National Guard in 1986, and discharged in 1991, right after Desert Storm. May I just say one thing that it's still amazing to me today. At the age of 15, I was a Boy Scout, first class, in a troop in Madison. And in 1937, we held in Madison one of the last encampments of the Grand Ole Army of the Republic. And that was Civil War, both Union and Confederate soldiers. And we were assigned, because they needed extra help, to take care of these Civil War veterans. I took care of a 90-some-year-old. He was drafted as a drummer boy, stayed in the Confederate Army during the period of time that they were in Madison. And good Lord, how many people can you talk to today that took care of and were intimately in contact with Civil War veterans? And it's amazing to me.
You know, thinking about that, thinking in time like that, you're the only person I've ever met who was in World War II, Korea, and Desert Storm.
Correct.
Yeah. So yours is a life of service. And do you think that World War II shaped your desire to continue to serve? And how did the war shape your life?
Absolutely. Even today, I give talks to veterans, conventions and parties and so forth, and I bring across the fact that I just don't want anybody to forget what, like the three of us here, went through during World War II, and what an honor it was as it has turned out. And we're not being taught the history that we should be in our high schools and even in our universities today. And I feel proud that I'm able to do that. I'll brag just a little bit. On Sunday, I'll be 101 years old.
Early happy birthday.
Happy birthday, dear.
Oh, my. Thank you.
Emily, let's go along with that same kind of thing, because that same topic, because yours is also a life of service. Even after working in the embassy, you started working in the VA, and you volunteered at the VA for years afterwards.
May I interrupt you? Because
Yes, ma'am.
You're concentrating so much on the embassy, and there were much more things happened before that. So I'd like to...
Please do.
Yes. Some of the things that happened to me while I was in the service. And like I say, I wanted to go overseas, and that didn't work out. Well, the next thing that happened, my father died. I was a month after I was in the service. Well, that was a great loss. Then the next thing that happened to me, I had a space between my two front teeth. I was born with a space, and I was at the mess hall. Of course, mess hall, you all know, is where we ate our meals. And I had a pork chop bone get in between my teeth and broke both front teeth. So that was my first big disaster in the service. And so, of course, they replaced that. And then in July, you all know who Gloria Vanderbilt is. Well, anyway, she wrote a letter to us, to the women in the service, said any women soldiers that were coming to New York and needed a place to stay, we could stay at her mansion free of charge. God. Well, my girlfriend was from Massachusetts and I was from Pittsburgh, and I said, oh my God, I said, we can't pass this up. I said, I've never been out of Sharpsburg. And so we put in leave for Christmas. We decided we're both going to go home for Christmas. And then after a couple of days, she would take the bus into New York, and I'll take the bus to New York, which is what happened. But then, of course, this was in July. Well, in August, of course, the war ended, and in September, is when the officer called me to his office and showed me the letter from the embassy. Well, I forgot all about that because I never expected to be working there. So the next thing was Christmas. So I go to New York, and my girlfriend, I met her in New York, and we get a cab and go out to Gloria Vanderbilt Mansion. Didn't even have an address. They didn't know where to take us. But anyway, he dropped us off, and she had a long pathway up to their door. We got up to the door, and the big signs closed. I said, "What?" I said, "You gotta be kidding." There wasn't not a single person around the place. It was just, everything was closed. And it's because the war was over already and say they weren't taking any more visitors. So now what do we do? Here we are, two little privates, we don't know what to do. And so I says, well, we got to go back to camp. We're going to be AWOL. And so anyway, we went to the bus station and tried to get a bus pass to Orlando, Florida. Well, they were all booked. We went to the train station. So I said, we'll take a train. Well, asked the agent for 2 tickets to Orlando, Florida. And he says, do you have a reservation? I said, reservation? I didn't know you needed a reservation for a train ride. He says, honey, those are his exact words, honey, this is New York. It's cold outside, and we're going to have a long winter. He says, half of New York goes to Florida for this session. We have nothing at all. Well, so what do we do? What do we do? We're oh gosh, we're scared to pieces. Well, at that point, some man tapped me on the shoulder. He says, I heard you. And he says, I know you need a place to stay. He says, why don't you try the Bowery? They always have rooms. Well, we didn't know what the Bowery was. But of course, by this time, it's close to 12 o'clock at night, and we are exhausted. So we go to the Bowery, and it's like all of these drunks sitting around, and they, you know, and at the window, he says, yes, he says, you're in luck. He said, somebody just signed out. He says, we don't have time to clean your room, but if you want it, you may have it. And I said, we'll take it. And so, because we were exhausted, so we got in the room and we moved all the furniture up against the door. And then we just took our jackets off and hats and flopped down on the bed on top of the clean sheets. And next day I said, I'm not staying here if I have to sleep on the sidewalk. So that was the end of that. So we then started to go to breakfast, and we were walking along the sidewalk, and we came along Salvation Army a building. And they had glass doors, and the lady inside looked very nice. I said, let's go in there and ask her where we could have breakfast. So we went in there, and I told her our story. She says, oh, my. And I says, would you by any chance be able to send our commanding officer a wire and tell her that we're stranded in New York, we can't get back to camp? And she says, oh, yes, I can do that. So anyway, she said she would do that, so we left. We had breakfast, and we walked around Times Square a bit because we were in New York. We wanted to see as much as we could. Well, but that wasn't working out well. So anyway, we got back, and then she said that she had an answer from the commanding officer, and she told us to report to Bowling Field, that's outside of Washington. And she said there were 2 officers, because the Air Force was under the Army at that time, and there were 2 officers from our base that were flying up there, and they were going to pick us up and fly us back. Well, you know, of course, that was such good news, but the point is that neither she or I had ever been in an airplane before, and we weren't looking forward to that, especially with 2 strange men going up in the air, and so we weren't happy, but we had to go, of course, and so so that was. Let me see, where am I now? I'm forgetting. Yeah. You want to talk to them a while?
Well, we're almost out of time, but I'd
Oh.
like to.
Oh, I got to tell you about the embassy then.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of think about, the end of the war. Really, there's a whole new world now. The world is going to be changed, and I'd like to kind of go over here to Dr. Jones. You became a lifelong educator, and as a lifelong educator, what do you think is the lasting legacy of the war, and what do we need to tell students about this war going forward?
I think that one's awareness of events, I guess I'm about to freeze up on the question. I would like to come back to that I grew up in a very isolated rural environment, the pre-electrical age. And when I joined the service, I am now expanding my awareness of things. I'm meeting people, and I remember specifically when I was at Chatham Field for basic training, I'm meeting people from many parts of the country. And so they are giving me ideas, and my world is expanding, and that is shaping what I'm going to be. And so as an educator, I have opportunities to promote ideas and to extend the knowledge of people. And that was a comfort to me in my life's experiences.
So as a parting thought, and this is to anyone, what do you think, what's the message of World War II? What's the legacy of the war? What do you want people to know about the war going forward?
I think the legacy of World War II is that the Declaration of Independence of Life in Pursuit of Happiness, and that people have their individual qualities, and they need to be respected and trusted in what they can do, and that dictators ruling the world and so forth is no longer possible, and so forth.
That's great. Absolutely great message.
So I'm not doing great.
Would either of you like to comment about that? About what you think the message of the war is today, or the meaning going forward? What would you like kids to know about the war?
Could you repeat that just a little bit
sir.
louder?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. What message would you like kids to know about the war today? What's the legacy of the war?
Of course, I never want to see another event like World War II. Don't know what's going to happen down the road, but we must keep our patriotism, must fight for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as we all have. Get back to saying well, I just can't see the changes that have developed from what we, as young men, still in high school, at the start of World War II, our feelings of what we were going to do, and there was no question we were going to go out, do our duty to our country. It's missing today in a lot of our high school kids, and this is what bothers me. And that's one of the things that I still do, and go around and talk to high school, even the kindergartners. They're great listeners, and we just had a time doing that. And I'll tell you one other thing, just to give you an idea of what can happen in high schools. There's a young lady that's a She'll be a senior this year in high school, but is she ever patriotic? She runs a veterans club at her high school and so forth, and she's even written a book, and it's called Lou and the Red, White, and Blue, and it's a tremendous book, and I'm so proud of her. And this is what we need. We need to have this redevelop again, and come back and be Americans.
Emily, I'm saving the last for you. What is your message to kids today?
Well, to tell you the truth, I mean, I wouldn't be speaking to any kids about the war because I wasn't in any battles or anything like that, so I'm not the one. But I was born on the 4th of July, so I was very patriotic. I was born on the 4th of July, and I became 100 years old. So anyway, but I got to tell you about the embassy. Oh, go ahead.
I'd like to make one comment on D-Day, the invasion of Normandy. Two of my schoolmates, Eugene Gayhart, was on that first day of the landing, and he was mortally wounded, taken to a field hospital. And another one of my schoolmates, Eugene Pendleton, visited the field hospital and talked to his schoolmate before he died. James Pendleton went through the entire war, and he was in the Battle of the Bulge. And he had been captured by the Germans and escaped. And then at another point, the German soldier said, surrender or die, and he ran away and got away from him, and his arm was severely damaged. He said from his hospital stay, one good thing that happened out of that, he met a nurse and became his wife. And for his service in the Battle of the Bulge, whatever he did, and the comment to me was that he received the Silver Star. I had a brother that served in the Korean War, and in his experiences on his discharge papers, it lists a bronze medal, and that would have been the Bronze Star, would be the third valor of recognition for that type, for being in the military service. When I was discharged and decided, people asked me, well, what are you going to do? And I would comment to them, well, I'm going to get an education. And they would say, well, why do you want to do that? And I said, I want to learn. And so I enrolled at Eastern Kentucky University, or college at that time. And I don't know why I enrolled in college algebra. I took the first course in chemistry and the first course in biology, and then Western civilization, and that was opening up a world to me. And every semester I repeated those types of courses and graduated, and finally decided that I was going to take the practicum and to become a science, high school science teacher. And I did that for several years. And then I enrolled for my master's degree at the University of Kentucky. And there I met a young woman. And one evening I had a square dance. We sort of liked each other. And at the end of that square dance event, I looked at her and she looked at me. And I thought, I'll never see her again. And I said, well, how about a date the next evening? And she didn't say no, she said yes. And from that, 2 years later, we were married. And then I enrolled in graduate school. And in that process, I'm studying and doing research. And I am using radioactive isotopes, iodine-131, and tritium label type of compounds. And from that, I got a PhD degree and on. I became a professor at Eastern Kentucky University, and finally chairman of the Department of Biological Sciences for several years. And that was part of all of that type of doing those things was based upon that my mother had been selected out of high school to enter into what was then called a normal school teacher preparation program, which was very common throughout the United States if you're in the more rural parts of the country where they did not have college degree types of people. But I think it is from that legacy from my mother and her teaching experiences that I entered into education and had all of that influence on high school students. I was a bus driver as part of that process, and on. So I've had a life of great experiences and connections and so forth that made a difference.
Thank you, sir. Well, I'm sorry I've got to cut it on off here. I know we could go on for quite a while, and it's been quite a treat. I can't thank the three of you enough for joining us this evening. Your insights about World War II is something that we can't take for granted, and I know I consider this a gift to be with you tonight. I'd also like, absolutely. I would also like to thank our audience members and those who joined us online for coming tonight. We hope that you never forget the significance of this anniversary and how it shaped not only our nation's future, but that of the entire world. So please join us for our final end of war program on Tuesday, September 2nd at 11 a.m. as we hear from Colonel Mike Bell, PhD, the Executive Director of our Jenny Craig Institute for the Study of War and Democracy, as he discusses the surrender ceremony aboard the USS Missouri on VJ Day. As always, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again here next time at the National World War II Museum. Thank you.